The future of music. How is music and innovation going to work together?
Hi, Tony. Good morning. Can you tell us a little bit about you and Tin Man the Telephone and allude us to who you are?
So my name is Tony Rowe. I'm the band leader of Tin Man and the Telephone. I'm a pianist. And I also run this little studio you see behind me. And yeah, we started this band about 10 years ago. And this is where we are now in lockdown in Amsterdam.
Very nice. And so tell us a little bit about your background specifically. You started as a pianist, but is that what you studied? And where are the origins of the project?
I started off studying classical piano. I realized it wasn't really my world at the time. So then I moved to industrial design and I did a few years of music technology to then come back to jazz piano at the Conservatory in Amsterdam, where I graduated in 2009. And it was also the period that I started experimenting with Tin Man. I was always interested in exploring other possibilities with the piano, to enhancing the sound of the piano in other ways. And at the time I had already a trio. Like any piano player, you have a trio and you practice your ass off to see how far you can bring it. But the hardest part is to find something which is really your voice, or something which really connects. And one day that kind of was given to me, and then I realized that I was onto something, so I started to take it further. And how that actually happened, it's maybe a funny episode. I was at the time touring with a pop band, and I was often away from home. And when I came home, I didn't have internet, and I did pay for it with a certain telephone provider. So I called them each time to solve it, and I'll come back after another 3 weeks of touring, and the problem was still there. So I got super angry, and I realized that when you're calling them, they put you on hold for half an hour, saying that all the employers are busy. And I was sitting with the phone like this, and playing with my right hand like this. And each time the voice would come saying that they were busy, I would kind of stop. And then I realized that this was pretty funny musical form. So then I hang up the phone and I put my microphones on the telephone and recorded the whole thing, transcribed the pitches of it. And then I just wanted to send it to the company as a little fuck you, like we're doing a really bad job. And then it was so funny working on this. And at first the band was a bit hesitant because it was something completely different than we ever done before. And then I sent it to the company and they responded. They found it quite hilarious and they fixed the problem. And years later, actually, the voice from that telephone company also wrote me. And I was a bit scared of that because we released a tune and of course I don't have the rights on that voice. But that's also the voice of the Schiphol airport in Amsterdam. And a well-known voice. And she said, I never heard something like this in 25 years of my working life. So this is really cool. But anyway, it was the starting point to realize that something which is so negative and annoying could turn into something which gives you a lot of musical structure and also a direction. So, and I often have been missing a bit of humor and how do you call it? It's like self-reflection in complicated music. So especially the contemporary classical or classical, more traditional, but also the jazz scene is often quite pretentious, what I think. And a little bit of humor or making things a bit lighter couldn't harm. So that's something I always took from the hip hop scene, because I was a fanatic hip hop fan at the time in the 90s. And there's always a bit of saying how great you are, but at the same time everybody knows it's not true. And that kind of became a thing in my work, that you play all kinds of stuff, but you might have something which heavily interrupts it or cuts against it. And that's still an important part of my work.
And is that phone conversation how the name came to be?
The phone conversation was not how it didn't trigger the name, but I did have something with telephones, and that's because we had an old telephone. A friend of mine who helped me out with the software in the beginning days, Augusta, we were always making things because we studied industrial design together, and then you just take old stuff and you break it and you put some electronics in the side. So we had an old phone from the 60s, and I could trigger all kinds of samples with it, and it was so iconic that I always thought, okay, that needs to be kind of a prop in the band no matter what. And then this whole thing with the telephone came all together. And many years later, we started to incorporate the telephones from the audience. So that's, yeah, that is a thing that kind of a
Right.
line.
The current members, all the original members, and how much do they contribute to the creation of the pieces? Whether is it just mostly musical, or do they also help create the apps and stage development?
So the lineup did change over the years. We now play since 4 or 5 years with another bass player called Pat Cleaver. Before was with Lucas Dols, and the drummer Bobby Petrov is still in there. However, we also play with Jamie Pate, Dutch drummer. Bobby lives in Bulgaria, and yeah, the process changed over time. So at the beginning, we did a lot together. We rehearsed 3 times a week. We always were working in my studio. We also made a lot of shows because we couldn't sell the band easily, and we realized that we could better do it ourselves. So we made our own shows, but that meant making a new repertoire, which was totally crazy. Right now, many years later, it became a lot more professional, maybe in a certain way. Like I prepare most of the things, the concepts. We do work together in residencies intensively, where we go over the material. I'm always open for other ideas, to change it. But basically, I'm running most of it, and the software is developed by Marcel Wierix, a great Max programmer, and we also have a team that makes the app for the mobile phones. So it became different. At the beginning, I used to program a lot with my friend Olger, and I also did half of that, which was very stressful and not so stable. And right now, that completely changed.
Nice. And so I understand incorporating the sound technology, many producers will sample and take in different pieces to kind of incorporate in that medium. But why the stage setup? Where did the video come from? What made you delve so deeply into technology and this whole interactive format?
The video thing came from basically the format of a jazz performance. With some guys sitting on stage and you're looking at them, I always found quite boring, and I miss a bit of the visual stimulus. So I was always thinking that it would be nice to incorporate more visuals. From the very start, we worked with Stijn van der Pol from Staff Visuals. You can't really see, but here in the back, you can see those posters were all designed with him. And I always found it extremely important to have a strong visual element. And maybe that came from another band that I played in at the time when I was developing Tin Man. It was called Room 11, a very sweet jazz pop band. We were quite successful in the Netherlands at the time. And that band had everything together, like there was a nice, the artwork was really good, the presentation, everything was thought of. And that was something new for me because that's not what I learned at the conservatory playing jazz. Just learned how to play well, and that was it. And this was something different. So I was thought like the whole imaging needs to be done from the very beginning. But when you have such imaging, it would be nice to have them on stage as well. So that video thing has been there from the start. We also moved at some point to have multiple projections. For example, at my final exam, I had a fire projected in the grand piano, like it's right from below, and all kinds of silly stuff just to lighten up the whole thing. And also to what I find very important is to make very clear that this will not be a regular jazz performance. So for many years we had a start of the show which was highly disturbing. For example, a phone sound going off, and I first asked the people to turn down their phones, and then they have a sound which is basically a sample, like, and I'll tell the people, man, okay, switch it, that fucking phone, it's super annoying. The people feel very ashamed and nervous, and and stuff like that. To then it turns out that it was a joke, and we start playing on it, and becomes a whole jazz improvisation. And always a little bit on the point of, is it intended or not? I find that a very interesting thing, where you get like a discomfort in the audience, and then it turns out to be intended, and then that's funny.
Do you create the visuals yourself, and what inspired you to touch on more political topics?
If you choose to blame us, I'll say we will never forgive you. If you choose to blame us, I'll say we will never forgive you. If you choose to blame us, I'll say we will never forgive you.
The visuals are made by Stijn van der Poel, and in the shows themselves, I make them. So I do all the video editing. And because it has that visual element, you soon get to deal with more topics, because people say, well, I've seen that show, you know, they would say, I've seen that video. But then I was thinking that that's quite interesting, because you would listen to Miles Davis play the same standard over and over again, going to the same concert. But when there's visuals involved, you immediately think, well, I've seen that before. So that always has been a challenging point. And after a few shows, actually the first show already was thematic, but the second show, for example, was about the soccer football play in 2010. And then we did everything around football. We get all kinds of matches, and it was, let's say, very light and funny, primarily. For example, we had a section where we would all be watching a match from that day, because it was played to that specific day. I recorded it, and each time the goal would come, we would switch to commercial. So you would miss the goal and you would have the commercial. I would be playing those. And then it would switch back to the goal, and then it turned out that you had missed it. So you would see maybe a bit of the, rewinding, and it was quite annoying. But after a few years, I started to realize, well, if you have all that infrastructure for that, it might as well be more having a real content. So that's when we moved to the first real one was World Domination, was about political stuff, basically about all the upcoming populism and all the big assholes in the world that are trying to make things worse. And I was so frustrated by that, and I thought, why not make a funny show where you actually address those things? And I sometimes have the feeling that in music we are asked to just provide things that are nice, very pleasant, and to make everybody press a like button. But we also have a tool to say things that are, a little bit more edgy, or maybe people might not agree. So we made that album, and it was featuring all kinds of political leaders like Trump and Erdogan and Putin and Kim Jong-un, and we made a lot of music around it.
Go home, Donald Trump! ¡Fuera Donald Trump de Venezuela! ¡Basta de intervencionismo!
¡A Venezuela se respeta, carajo! Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump.
And a lot of people like it. Some people dislike it a lot, and that doesn't matter. I think that's important point about it. And then we made a website to accompany the album, and on the website you can actually pick your leader and swipe them away from this planet, so you can clean up the planet. You first see them on the globe, and then they slowly go away. And of course that meant that we are not so welcome in certain countries. And at the same time, I think that's also a part why you do this. So it became a lot more content driven.
And when did you start deciding to involve the audience? And can you explain a little bit about the app, how it works, and where it began?
Let me think. It was in 2014, I think we had to make another album, but the albums don't really fit the concept of what we do, because it's just a CD or it's just vinyl. But the shows are a lot more than just that music. So we were thinking, how can we make something which is more interactive? So a DVD didn't seem to work. Then we had the options for an interactive website or for an app. We didn't know anything about apps, but found somebody who could make an app. So we made interactive music where you could go through to takes of a tune and to change it and to go through different solos and to I do all kinds of stuff. It was extremely expensive and time consuming to make, and didn't really work as well as we hoped, because the phones keep changing, the OS, the operating systems. So each half year you have to, and again, invest in updating all this stuff. It's not so cool. But there was one example. There was Björk, who had made a fantastic album. Nobody made something as cool as that, Biophilia. And we didn't have that, of course, that budget to work like that. So I wanted to make something that she didn't do, and it was to have the app actually be used in the show. So we made a little button that you could press, and then in the show we could, do something with the audience. And on the first test, it turned out to be so successful. I mean, the software was really shaky, and the performance wasn't that good, but the audience response was really interesting. So we did a couple of games. People had to guess what was happening musically, and would have to vote for it, or they could change the music itself. We had a camel race where you would see camels running and the audience had to shake, and then they would influence the tempo of their own camel, which caused a lot of computer crashes. But the core idea was born there all of a sudden, that the audience was way more up for interacting than I ever imagined. And now with the real topics, in the last year we moved to the climate change topic, which is extremely complicated to deal with in an hour. But to basically have the audience give input and to let them, I don't know, like make connection with you rather than me dictating what's supposed to be done. And often music or concerts are one directional. You perform your thing and you give it to somebody else. And like this, you basically open it up and you allow the audience to give input.
Can you explain a little bit about the technological process in the shows? What technology is used, how it works, the real-time applications?
So technology-wise, we are using Max MSP on my main computer that controls all the patches. So I could, for each tune, I have a different patch, which means I can, let's say, I can trigger a video, I can switch on the lights, I can trigger sounds.
Are you able to show us any of this? Perhaps like you have an interface that you use?
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go. This is what is going to transmit all the data from the piano. Okay, so we have the piano here. We got a flight case with my Max computer built in, another one for sounds. Sound card, DIs, and basically all the cables put in.
Great.
Okay, so the behind the scene process. This screen is something that only I see on my touch screen normally. This is Max MSP. So on the left side, I get all data coming in from, let's say, a connection with the audio card, connection with lights, the position of the telephone, where they are, what people are actually seeing. I have a button here that if I press flash phones, I switch on all the lights. This can also be done more dynamically by playing the piano. All the problems that might arise with the internet and stuff I see over here, which is super vital for my show. On the top, I see all the input from the instruments, the piano, the bass, and the drums.
Did you have to customize this layout?
Yeah, so this is all written. This was a year work. It seems small, but behind each thing, it's an enormously big infrastructure that makes this possible. Everything in the middle are patches, and we have another 4 or 5 of these pages, which we run in separate shows. So yeah, it's really a couple of years work that's behind it. So for example, the screen, this is now what the audience sees. So if
So that will be the projection.
Yeah, this is what the people see. I connected it with my piano, so if I press the highest note, I can toggle through different things. So here, for example, I have a patch for typing. Can you read this?
Yep. And what's the process of what we just saw? You coded the alphabet to the notes?
Well, it's actually a long time ago, a guy, I think a Japanese guy, made all kinds of extensions, and with that you could control kinds of functions. So for example, also the cursor you could assign. So and all I do is connect all the letters from the alphabet. So you have just 26 letters or even a bit more. Then you assign it to all the keys. So each letter sends out a MIDI note. In this case, this is MIDI note 60. You see it here on the top. Sorry, it's super angled. And then in the program, it just says, okay, the A is going to be note 60. And I did it grammatically. So I thought that was just an experiment to see if that worked. It took me a long time to learn it, but in the end, it functions. And then that little extension in the program just makes sure that the letter comes out. It's a very simple mapping, like super simple one-on-one mapping between a note of a piano and a letter and an alphabet. The results are pretty complicated because all of a sudden you have to learn that all your notes can mean something. So I'm writing pieces like that too. So for example, if you might have a show called climate change, then I might type climate change and people start to get used to the sound of those words if you repeat it enough. But also when the people start chatting back, then you get a communication going on with them. So you have to respond on whatever they're saying, which is quite complicated because as a musician you have to think about how it still sounds good. Now we did all kinds of tests with it, and one current one is that we asked the audience for a name of a new planet. People come up with all kinds of words, and the words are sent to the computer, and the computer then in Max we do the reverse process, so all the letters are being put after each other one by one very quickly, and they output a note. In this case, it will go out as MIDI going to one of my synthesizers. So I'm playing this little OP1 synthesizer is then playing all the words of the audience. And then since we kind of know what the letters and the note relations are, I can anticipate. So when I see a certain word, I can already know how it's going to sound. So that means I can harmonize it on the spot. Well, here it says, how can we maximize global warming? And then we ask in 30 seconds people for input. All the words, they will come in this list. So I'll see the names of the phones, and I'll behind it I can make a, how do you call it, the selection. So I select, let's say 10 or 15 things, and they will come later. They will appear on the screen. But anyway, all the inputs, they will come here. Here I can decide how the music is being played. So for example, each word is being repeated. So letter by letter, generating a note, which is then going to the synthesizer. And then, for example, I can loop it, or I put it in a sequence so they all come after each other. There's a little delay, which is more like a musical parameter. So we can have a gap between the words, which can be short or very long, or anything in between. So we can actually, as a band, respond to what's happening musically. And with the piano, I can then trigger, I'm not sure if I can show that, but I can then trigger which one is being played. You wouldn't see that now because there's no input. And on the screen, you will see all the words appear. So I can call them up from my piano. If I like a specific word, I can just play a note, and then that word will get stuck in the loop. So we can play with it. So this is, I think, a really fun way where the audience gets to give a lot of creative input, but we at the same time have to respond to that. We have no idea what's coming, so every show is completely different. And at the same time, you also have like a bit of a content, because I'm saving the best ones, and then we go to a next screen. Again, this only works when there's actually input. But here you will see the top list, and people will vote for that. So whatever names then chosen will continue for next thing. For example, here we are approaching a new planet, and then you'll see the name of the planet that the people chose before. So, you know, it's all connected. People have to use their phone to tilt it, as you see in the video, to then navigate. So if you tilt it, this is going to move around. Yeah, this is one of the coolest patches where at some point ask somebody to come to the front, is getting an upgrade, first class upgrade in the show. And then that person has to give a little pitch about why their idea was so good. And then all the waveform comes here. So whenever they talk, I can record it here. I have some controls for that. You see these huge buttons, because in the meantime, I still have to talk and perform. And then when that's done, I can press all these buttons to select. I can just grab a little part and assign it, which is immediately assigned to those MIDI notes, which is corresponding with my piano. So I can go very quickly in selecting a waveform, which is then connected to a key, and then we start playing and trying to find the music in that. But it is really complicated. It took me a long time to learn, and I am doing a research about this, and I found out that there was a device in Italy made in the war for faster coding, and instead of using Morse code, they could use this. And it was basically just exactly the same, just a piano of about 30 letters. So you had 26 letters and a couple of things for making spaces or dots and stuff like that. But you had to be a trained pianist in order to control this thing, you know, to be able to play. But it's exactly the same concept.
How do you do the live video looping and then playing off of this?
I went with a cow, and I thought there could be a tree that grows cows. That's actually it. Pretty dumb.
Okay. Fair enough. There you go.
They don't produce cows. That's dumb. Pretty dumb. Pretty dumb. Pretty dumb.
Well, there's a couple of methods. What I do often is that I use the highest keys of the piano to trigger, let's say, a start or stop of a video, or go to the next video, or to go to a certain part. I'm using the highest C to start this video, and then we move to the next thing, and then they start playing. And the idea is that each time they hit the ball, we play a certain tune, a jazz tune. And we take the rhythm from the ball, so 1, 2, 3. So we follow that, and when the ball goes off, we play something else. So we wait until they start playing it again. So it kind of gives us a form. So we know like this, he's going to pick it up and throw it again. And 1, 2. And we pick that as tempo, and that's off again. So that's one thing, but at some point, so this is not really interactive as in we cannot influence the way they play, but at this point I can. So they having these snippets, and I have it connected. Can you see this well?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can control certain snippets of the video by using target points on the piano. So yeah. Often the concept of my work is to take something which is non-musical and to force it into music. And then we played a tune that we ended up with when we started constructing something with the tennis players. So it's all a bit connected. So I move between videos that I can really manipulate and stuff that I cannot really manipulate. So that it goes back and forth. Here the same, we have a start of the video, and then we have Mr. Trump saying a lot about how things are not fair. And then at some point I can start a loop. So with another note I can start a loop on which we play. And then I have another key to switch it off the moment I get fed up of him.
What challenges do you face with this type of format, whether it be specifically technology while you're playing or also the reciprocation of the audience? Do you feel that most of the viewers are ready for this kind of format?
That's a good question. It depends a lot on the audience. Younger audiences are totally ready for it. Older audiences are quite hesitant, especially in certain countries. It's quite different in other places. There's also places where this technology is so far ahead where that people don't believe it, so they think everything is set up, where most of it is interactive. And yeah, it really changes. But in general, the last years is going fine. But in the beginning, especially in Germany, I remember concerts that all the audience, they all put off their phone, put it in their pants, and they did not want to participate at all. And we were asked to do an interactive concert, so we didn't, we can also do just instrumental concert, but that was not what we got asked to do. So everybody unhappy, and it's quite interesting. Later on, I learned that how you have to approach audiences. So in some countries you have to ask, in some countries you have to give orders. Like if you don't grab your phone, then we're gonna leave the stage. and then people all do their participate. But in general, it's also interesting to see that all the audiences, I think about 30% participates. And we're talking about 50 plus, 60 plus. When you play for younger people, the rate is at least half or higher. But if you play for teenagers, which you do quite often, then it's often 95 to 100% participation. So that really says a lot about age. And yeah, for the younger people, this makes total sense. They and also in terms of explanation. For example, I have a lot of explanation patches. Each patch that I have has also a connection with the phone. So if we don't want any interaction, it says please listen and enjoy. But if we do want interaction, it will give you the interface. So here I can, for example, switch on the beats. People see all kinds of beats on the phone, but I give the instructions here. This is what the people see. And then while I talk, I toggle through the pages to give instructions. But for teenagers, this really doesn't work, and they don't want any instructions. So they just start off right away. So that's why I have the option to switch on and off the interfaces. So sometimes I give instructions before I turn on the interfaces because they wouldn't listen anymore. So each show you learn something and you start to work on, you know, tailor it. And so in terms of yeah, there's normally 1/3 of audience interaction. There's 1/3 that's really fixed, and 1/3 that's really yeah, completely open. It's not a very strict rule, but I learned over the years that too much audience interaction makes it unnecessary to basically perform as a band. If you do too little audience participation, then people that are really into it, they find it a gimmick. So it's like it's not significantly adding up to the performance. It's very important that people have agency over what they do. So if it's just to click something and you get a little sound and that's it, then it doesn't feel like it's enough. I always like it when there's at least 1/3 like real significant playing, something more heavy, which is not interrupted by anything else. So we try to balance it.
And back to perhaps implementing any new technology, do you see yourself kind of getting excited about experimenting with anything in the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. One thing I'm interested in, although I'm not sure how it's going, but this 5G internet will change stuff. It will be possible to use much higher data transfer. So, for example, with videos, you could even do online concerts probably in real time or with a lot less latency. At the same time, we hear a lot of negative stories about it, so I'm not sure when this will be implemented and whether it's good. And
would you work with VR?
Yeah, that's a good question. VR so far didn't really trigger me that much. I think it's cool, but what I don't like about it is when you have things on your head, you kind of disconnect from the other people in the hall. Whereas we try to open up the connection between people more. So, for example, if you have something where I can say, okay, people whose phones light up red, you know, you hold up your phone and you can see who's connected to your group. Those things I find somehow at this moment more interesting to see how you can do certain games within the audience rather than to close them. At the same time, this technology will also develop and will become much cooler and easier to use, I guess, in the future. And because when these Google glasses were announced, you know, you could have a glass with and on that glass you could project all kinds of stuff. I was super interested in that. I was very eager to invest in that and to see, because I would prefer to see all the data, for example, from my program right in front of my eyes without having to see, look at the computer screen. Just like pilots have in fighter planes. They have like a helmet with all kinds of visual information right within their, you know, glasses. So yeah, technology, but you always keep an eye open because the moment you embrace technology, you can always go other directions. You're not stuck in one way. So the app technology is just something temporarily, I think. It might go away in the future and might become something else. So be always open for new things.
What does the future hold for Tin Man and the telephone?
That's a good question. I think, first of all, we have to see how we get out of this crisis.
Making a Corona concert.
Yeah, definitely. I'm working on 4 transcriptions, and one is this thing, Dan Difficiles, which is this guy called Spiri something he's a doctor from Spain, and in one video he's super angry at all the people, asking how difficult it is to just stay in the side and to not move. And he gets so angry, and the pitches go up half step and half step, and it's fantastic. So I just had to transcribe it, but it is a bit. He's so fast, so it's a bit complicated. We are planning to do this next week, and it could be quite cool because people can participate with the app remotely. So even if you just run it on your computer, you can see the show, the screen that I just showed you, and on your phone you can still participate. So I'm setting this up. I'm waiting for a little bit more adjustments.
Can you give us a little highlight about what the concept will be? How do you plan to target Corona via Tin Man and the telephone?
Well, it's basically a call to leave this planet, and you can join us, and we're gonna leave this planet. We all sitting on a big spaceship towards a new planet, and in the meantime you see the news from back home, so you see what's happening, and you see all the people being frustrated and locked up, and politicians and stuff like that. So it has it's the best moment we ever had to leave this planet. So it's basically how we link the story.
Very nice. Well, lovely. And do you have any closing thoughts for us?
Stay healthy.
Perfect.
Stay
Well,
healthy. Clean your garden.
Well, thank you so much. We really enjoyed having you. And
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.